สวัสดีครับ Welcome to part 2 on how to deal with interpersonal conflict. In part 1, we laid down the foundations to look at what happens within us psychologically and emotionally, how we process experiences, and what senses of attachment to self, attachment to various concepts, ideas, and anything that your mind identifies with, that becomes part of this identity structure, your ego structure, your me structure. By definition, these things get challenged in a conflict. So you have a natural tendency to have a very emotional reaction when these aspects of our sense of self get challenged. It's good to understand that so that we become more aware of this in ourselves, so that we don't fall for our traps and react to our emotions, which would only make the thing worse. Obviously, if we can truly appreciate and understand this process that goes on in ourselves, that produces the emotions of frustration, anger, feeling upset, sadness, even jealousy, hate, the need for revenge, anything, the need to be right, the need to protect your sense of self, your identity structure, anything. If you can truly understand that, then we can also see this going on in the other person. And from that, it helps us to approach the problem from the framework of understanding rather than from the framework of needing to be right, needing to win the argument for the sake of protecting yourself, right? Because the objective is to find a solution for both parties, a picture that both sides can look forward to in the future in this conflict resolution. Okay, so it's helpful to understand ourselves and therefore the other. And I think this ties in very well with the concept of thrive, which we have been reviewing the past months. Is again, we don't experience reality. What we experience is almost as if we always wear a lens, a pair of glasses that is shaded a certain way. This lens is how we see the world, right? Our experience and our understanding of the world is always a result of our interpretation and our judgment of what we experience, right? So each person always wears a different lens. Each person, when they experience objective reality, they pull different interpretations and different judgments and different feelings from factual reality. As the example that I like to give in many of my videos, two people can be sitting in this room that I'm filming right now, and one person can feel that this room's ugly, can feel that the air conditioning is not working right, it's still very hot. Another person can feel that this room is nice and cozy. Sure, it could be cooler, but I'm comfortable. They're in the same room, but the lens that they put on, the shade that they use, the pair of glasses that they use, the filter that they have when they make sense of reality is very different. So we want to keep this in mind and appreciate this fact when dealing with somebody else. Now, the next point that I want to make is, why is it that two people on different sides of a conflict can experience it so differently? And I want to borrow the concept from a person named Sheila Heen. She is an expert in conflict management, and I came across one of her writings, and I think she explained it very well. Two main parts that, in addition to what we just talked about, how understanding your own emotional processes and understanding how we experience reality differently through the lens or the filter that we wear. Sheila Heen proposed these two ideas. One is the emotional math, how we calculate our emotions. And number two is how memory works. So number one, emotional math. Say, let's imagine, right? Let's imagine that we're sitting watching a movie, watching two people argue, right? Let's say we're scientists observing what happens. Let's say person number one gets angry. right? And person number 2 has to deal with that anger. Now, as the conflict happens and as the conflict passes, of course, it's going to lead to different interpretations of what happened in that event, correct? Here's why. From person number 1's perspective, when he or she got angry, he or she thinks to himself that, well, this is not me. I'm not usually angry. I get angry once in a while, and it's normal. We're all human, right? So, I'm just not in my normal sense of self. This is not normally how I behave. So you should, understand this. This is how person number 1 would look at it. He or she would therefore water down the emotional outrage or the anger that he or she displayed to the other person, thinking to himself or herself that, look, I don't usually get angry. I'm not usually like this, so you shouldn't take it too seriously, right? So how do you think that person calculates the emotional math? He or she will think it's no big deal. I was just frustrated. I was just angry. What's the big deal? But from person number 2's perspective, as the person who had to deal with that anger, had to deal with that tantrum, had to deal with that outrage, from his or her perspective, from person number 2's perspective, that anger is exactly what he or she has to deal with. It is exactly what defines the person who got angry. Because dealing with your anger, dealing with your tantrum is not fun. It's not a good experience. And I always feel like I always have to be on guard because I don't know when you're going to explode out of your anger. You claim that that's how you are, but from my perspective, from person number 2's perspective, this is exactly how I have to put up with, how I have to deal with this troublesome situation in the relationship or whatever. So we can see how each person on each side of the conflict calculates the experience entirely differently. Again, person number 1 waters it down. Person number 2 would tend to naturally exaggerate it, thinking that it's a big deal because they have to put up with this tantrum at random times. I don't know when you're going to act like a kid and explode out of anger again, right? So this is concept number 1, emotional math. Number 2, memory. The way in which memory works, especially when there is no open communication between 2 parties. So let's say the conflict happened. It could be about anything. Who cares? It could be about a conflict on a difference of opinion, a conflict on values, a conflict on sharing responsibility around the house, right? A conflict on having dinner together or, whatever. Like one person wants to have dinner together at the same time, another person doesn't want to do that. It could be anything. It doesn't matter. But once the conflict ends, right, and each side carries on in their life, maybe a few hours pass by, a day or 2 passes by, maybe a week or even months passes by. Each time we recall a memory of that event, we don't have a picture perfect, a video perfect, an audio perfect recording of what happened. And this is also, in line with scientific research, and as I reviewed from Thrive as well, that we can think of memory as, it's not like we have some file in our brain stored perfectly about what happened. Each time we recall an event in the past, it's like a jigsaw puzzle that is missing some pieces. The gaps that are missing in that picture, we always have to reinterpret what happened to fill in the gaps as we recall the memory. So each time somebody recalls a memory, they are recalling a slightly different version of it from the last time they thought about it. So imagine this goes on for days and weeks and months, and both sides didn't talk to each other. Both sides did not have open communication about how they felt, about how to solve the problem. They have been interpreting this and recalling this event over and over again and thinking about it, interpreting it again until they're on version number 100. So this is why each side can be led to feel very differently towards the conflict, right? Why, as time goes by, each side can look at the situation completely differently. We have to keep this in mind. Especially so when one side experiences an emotional imprint from that event, right? So Sheila Heen gave an example. Let's say siblings who have a conflict. This could be date years back to even childhood, where one person, let's say the brother, right, didn't really have a memory of the event because it made no emotional imprint, because the brother did not realize how this conflict or his behavior back then in childhood affected the sister. Whereas person number 2, the sister, felt emotionally affected by it. So that emotional imprint was associated with the creation of the memory of the event. I guess you can look at it that way. So this helps to understand the dynamics that go on in how we process our psychology, which is why both sides of the conflict can see things so differently. It doesn't mean that they're selfish, that they're bad, that they're evil, that they're not taking responsibility. It just means that this is how one explanation is that it's a psychology, how we process our experiences, right? We feel that it's real to us, but as time goes by, due to a number of different reasons, emotional math, memory, the lens that we put on, it can lead to totally different storylines as we retell it again. So what's the key takeaway from this? When solving a conflict, when dealing with conflict, when something needs to be said, when an open communication is called for, one person is going to have to be the bigger person here, so to say, and listen to the other person first. This is where active listening skills come in, right? An important skill to have is active listening. It is a very important part of communication skills. Active listening does not mean to listen to the other person while also judging them in order to think about how I should best reply to this, how I should best reply to show them why they are wrong and why I'm right. That's not active listening. Active listening has the primary purpose of understanding the situation from that person's perspective, from that person's viewpoint, from their eyes, right? And this can be much easier said than done, especially when that person has a perspective that, again, challenges our ego or challenges our personal identity structure, that says that what we did was selfish, that says that we were inconsiderate. But here's why active listening works. And again, I want to thank Sheila Heen for pointing this out. You see, we have to understand that in order to promote the other person, to get a shift in perspective, to understand our position better, they first have to feel understood and listened to. This is very, very key. Most people naturally are not going to entertain a different perspective, are not going to try to shift their perspective to see how the other person thinks about them or about the conflict until they first feel understood and felt heard and felt that they were listened to. So this is the very important point to stress. Active listening. The key here is to listen to understand the other person's frame of reference to say, right? And here's where the challenge comes in. If you truly are listening in the right way, active listening, you have to be able to get to the point where you're able to summarize their perspective and the position to them, and maybe even perhaps make their argument a little bit better. Now, that's going to be much easier said than done, because that might mean to challenge some part of your identity structure or to challenge some part of your ego structure, which is why it's easier said than done. But trust me, if you're able to do this, I guarantee you, you are promoting both sides of the conflict to look towards a peaceful and constructive resolution that is oriented towards the future, not to be stuck in the past. This leads to the next point. Active listening will help you maintain goodwill. Goodwill is important for conflict management because what we want is to demonstrate to them that we are more interested in understanding each other and finding a solution that works for the both of us rather than saying who is right or who is wrong. right? Sure, they may get angry or upset even in the dialogue, because I'm not saying this is easy, right? None of this is easy. They may get upset. They may still call you names. But again, because you want to solve this conflict, you're going to have to be the bigger person here, because somebody has to be. And even though they might label you names, they might call you names, they still might accuse you of being selfish or being irresponsible, deep down they will still sense that you still have goodwill for them. Maybe they won't admit it because, they're still emotional in that time, in that moment, even in the dialogue, even after the conflict has happened and you're trying to find a solution. But they will be able to sense the goodwill. So what does goodwill mean? Goodwill means that we want to separate the person from his or her behavior. We understand that the person is not truly to intend to cause evil or harm, but that their behavior in that moment of time, it made sense to them. It may have caused them to get hurt. It may have caused you to get hurt, but they didn't intend to, because in that moment of time, their behavior made sense to them. And so we separate that person that we're dealing with from his or her behavior. And trust me, this narrative is a much better narrative to take. It's much more light because it promotes understanding. And once we have understanding of the other person, there's no need to get upset with them. And that's a very powerful place to be. And that's what I want to propose in today's video. Now, next step. Once you have listened to them, once you have demonstrated goodwill, you also get to say your piece. Here's where the fun begins. You also get to say your piece. It's not about just listening and letting them shit all over you or say that you're bad. You also get to say your piece. But I want to propose you to try to use what's called an I message. An I message is a message or a communication style that is designed to get them to understand the impact that their behavior has on you without accusing them or without challenging their ego, without accusing them of being wrong or inconsiderate. So for example, if you're going to say, I think you're so inconsiderate, that is not an I message because you are accusing them, and that promotes confrontation, promotes anger, promotes, conflict, makes the conflict continue. Instead of saying that, I think you're so inconsiderate or selfish, you perhaps can say, I message is something like, I felt unimportant to you, right? You're not accusing them of being bad, but you're trying to get them to recognize how their behavior has that impact on you, right? Next part is, this may be hard, but naturally in all conflicts, if we look hard enough, perhaps sometimes, usually in most cases, we will find that we also have a responsibility to play. We also have a role to play, some behavior or something that we can also work on to make the conflict resolution possible. So, truly be honest to yourself. Perhaps you were ignorant of their needs or their expectations. Perhaps you were rude to them. Perhaps you didn't understand how your behavior made them feel unimportant to you. And take responsibility on that. Perhaps apologize, or perhaps propose ways that you can change, that both sides can work together and both sides can accept, right? So take responsibility for your part, be the bigger man, and accept that perhaps if you did something wrong, accept it, apologize, and try to find something that you can change from that. Remember, the best apology is not to say sorry, but to show them that you really care through a change in your actions or your behavior that shows them that you take them into consideration, that you care for them, and that you're trying to work with them. That's the best apology. Number 10, next part, is when we talk about this conversation, it is so easy to bring up the past, to find a fault or flaw in the other person, especially if it's somebody who you're intimate with or is a family member. We've all been there. An argument leads to digging up the past. Don't go there. That's only going to confront the ego. It's going to be very confrontational. We want to keep the conversation focused on the future, of how the future, through this conflict resolution, can be acceptable and beneficial to both sides. Don't focus on the past. Don't focus on past mistakes. Forgive the other person for their past mistakes and don't fall for the trap of being dragged into talking about the past. They might accuse you of something in the past, and it'll be very tempting to fall into that trap and talk about it or defend your position and accuse them back. Try not to. Try your hardest. Remember, it goes back to part 1's video. Be aware of the emotions that arise in you. Always have awareness in your present moment experience. Separate yourself from the emotional processes that happens in you so that you don't have to react to them, right? So this is in a nutshell what we can do, some ideas for you to consider, right? In dealing with conflict management, interpersonal conflict management. Should something need to be said, should a conversation need to be had, etc., right? The key is to understand the person first, understand how both sides can have very different opinions, values that are shaped by the lens that they wear, different value system, different opinions on how they would approach the issue. Perhaps you would have handled the conflict a certain way, but maybe they would have wanted to handle it differently. It might not mean that you are wrong or that they are wrong or that you are right or that they are right. It just means that maybe you have different value systems, and that's okay. Understand the emotional math and how memory works, right? How when we reinterpret experiences that happened in the past, we are recreating our memory. We are recreating that experience through a reinterpretation. So this helps to, as time goes by, make people see what happened in the past very differently. Again, active listening, maintain goodwill, use iMessage, and take responsibility for your part, and keep the conversation focused on the future, what it could mean for you two, not the past. Okay? I hope these concepts are very valuable for you. And to end here, I want to give a few examples. So for example, let's say a conflict has to do with family dinner. Maybe your parents, especially in this time of COVID-19 where you have to stay at home more often, maybe your parents want to use this time to get to interact with you better, more, to get to hang out with you more as their child. But maybe they don't know how to communicate that. Maybe they make family meals, and maybe you already had your own food prepared through takeaway delivery or anything, right? And maybe they feel a bit hurt that you're not joining dinner, or that they feel ignored by you, and maybe their communication comes off wrong, right? And you make it into an argument over that. So use these principles again. Understand the perhaps undisclosed expectation from the parent. Try to understand what they want out of it. They don't want to force you to eat against your will. They just want to spend more time with you. Maybe their approach is wrong. Maybe the way they try to show that they want to spend time with you, maybe it didn't come off right. But understand that first. See that first. And then use iMessage, right? Show them that you appreciate the dinner. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I understand. I really see that you took a lot of time and effort to make this dinner. I really appreciate that. But right now, I'm really busy with work, so I really got to eat quickly, and I want to go in my room and continue on my work. And propose something to look forward to. How about lunch together tomorrow? Or how about we go for a walk, or walk in the neighborhood in the evening, or something like that. Find something that you both can agree on and look forward to and focus on, and remove the need to focus on the conflict. Here's another example. This is one that I've seen before, and actually quite see often, especially for people in my age range, where our parents are getting to the age where they're getting older, right? And they want to do things that are still important, that are still valuable, like help around the house, clean this, clean that. And I've heard one case where I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a while back ago, and they mentioned how they worry a lot, how their mom, who is getting more old, still likes to climb on the chair and likes to climb on the ladder to clean the upper areas of the windows or anything, and it's quite dangerous, right? Because if mom falls, has an accident, it's going to be a big problem, right? So we have to understand that the best way to approach it is not to yell at mom and tell mom, can you stop doing that? You're going to hurt yourself, which is a lot of which is unfortunately how a lot of people actually communicate. We have to first understand where mom's coming from or where dad's coming from, right? Where our parent is coming from. When, for example, perhaps an idea to throw here to consider, just brainstorming on the top of my head, is perhaps, when we begin to get older, we still want to feel competent. We don't want to feel old, fragile, and useless, and we don't want to feel like we are a burden to other people. So we still want to feel that we're still physically active and able to do these physical activities that require climbing on a chair or etc. When in fact, we're getting to the age where we got to be careful about those things because they can be dangerous if we fall, right? So understand where they're coming from and try to show them that you appreciate what they're doing and offer something else that you appreciate that they can do for you that is not going to put their own life at risk, right? There are many ways, many creative solutions to this. If we first understand where the other person is coming from, we will want to also work with them and find a solution. Not just yell at them or tell them to stop doing that. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to be a burden for me if you hurt yourself, because that's essentially how they hear it. You might say that you're going to hurt yourself, mom, and you might mean have a good intention. But the way they hear it, they might hear it as, oh, I'm going to be a burden for you, right? So that's an example, right? Again, goodwill, active listening, iMessage, take responsibility for your part, and keep the conversation about the future. So that's what I want to propose in today's video. I hope this was valuable for you. If you're going through any conflict or any arguments during this time, which I'm sure that maybe perhaps we are seeing more of that because we live so much closer together due to the coronavirus situation. Okay, I hope this was valuable for you. Please leave in comments what you think. Share your experiences with me, right? I want to hear your take on it too. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. สวัสดีครับ